Vascular dementia doesn't progress like Alzheimer's disease. While Alzheimer's typically causes gradual, steady decline, vascular dementia follows a different, more unpredictable pattern that catches families off guard. According to research from the Alzheimer's Association, vascular dementia is the second most common type of dementia after Alzheimer's, accounting for approximately 10% of all dementia cases. But many experts believe it's significantly underdiagnosed because its symptoms differ from the memory problems people expect with dementia. Vascular dementia occurs when reduced blood flow to the brain damages brain tissue. This reduced blood flow can result from strokes, small vessel disease, or other conditions affecting brain blood vessels. Unlike Alzheimer's, where brain changes progress continuously, vascular dementia often progresses in steps. A person functions at one level, then experiences a vascular event like a stroke or series of mini-strokes, and suddenly declines to a new, lower baseline where they stabilize until the next event. What shocked me when I researched this topic is that many people with vascular dementia and their families don't recognize the progression happening. They attribute changes to normal aging, recovery from a stroke, or just having bad days. This means opportunities for intervention are missed. Recognizing progression allows doctors to adjust treatments, implement new strategies to prevent further vascular events, and help families plan for increasing care needs. In this video, I'll reveal 10 signs that vascular dementia is progressing in someone over 60. Number 6 is so subtle and happens so gradually that even healthcare professionals sometimes miss it for months, delaying crucial interventions that could slow further decline. Before we start, I need to be crystal clear about something. This video is for educational awareness only. If you're caring for someone with vascular dementia or have been diagnosed yourself, work closely with your healthcare team. Recognizing progression early allows interventions that can prevent further brain damage and maintain quality of life longer. Now let's dive into the signs that vascular dementia is worsening. Sign number 10. Sudden worsening of cognitive function after being stable. Starting with the most characteristic pattern of vascular dementia progression, sudden stepwise decline is the hallmark that distinguishes vascular dementia from other types. Here's why this happens. Unlike Alzheimer's disease, which causes gradual, progressive decline, vascular dementia typically progresses in a staircase pattern. The person functions at a relatively stable level for weeks or months. Their cognitive abilities remain fairly consistent during this plateau period. Then suddenly, often following a stroke or series of small strokes, their function drops to a noticeably lower level. After this sudden decline, they stabilize again at the new lower baseline. Research from the journal Stroke shows that approximately 60% of people with vascular dementia show this characteristic stepwise pattern of decline. Each step down typically follows a vascular event that damages additional brain tissue. The mechanism involves acute damage to brain tissue from interrupted blood flow. When a stroke or series of mini-strokes occurs, brain cells in the affected region die from lack of oxygen. This creates sudden loss of whatever functions those brain cells controlled. If the stroke damages regions controlling memory, memory suddenly worsens. If it affects regions controlling movement, walking or coordination suddenly declines. The person might be managing fairly well, then family notices that overnight or over just a few days, they seem markedly worse. They're more confused, they can't do tasks they were managing the previous week. This sudden change indicates new brain damage from another vascular event. What makes recognizing this pattern crucial is that it signals the need for urgent evaluation and more aggressive prevention of future strokes. Each stepwise decline represents brain damage that's permanent. Preventing the next vascular event could prevent the next step down in function. If you notice sudden cognitive worsening in someone with vascular dementia, particularly if it coincides with new neurological symptoms like weakness, vision changes, or speech problems, contact their doctor immediately. They may have had another stroke requiring emergency treatment. Even if the changes seem subtle, any sudden step down warrants medical evaluation to assess for new vascular events and adjust preventive treatments. Sign number 9, increasing difficulty with executive function and planning. Moving to a cognitive domain particularly affected by vascular dementia, progressive problems with executive function often appear early and worsen over time. Here's why this happens. Executive function refers to higher-level cognitive abilities including planning, organizing, problem-solving, and completing complex multi-step tasks. These functions are controlled primarily by frontal regions of your brain working together with other areas through neural networks. Vascular dementia frequently damages the white matter tracts connecting these regions and the subcortical structures involved in executive function. The person shows increasing difficulty planning and organizing activities they previously managed easily. Someone who efficiently paid household bills for decades now struggles to figure out which bills to pay first, how to write checks correctly, or how to keep organized records. They might pay some bills twice while completely forgetting others. Someone who cooked complex meals effortlessly now can't plan a meal requiring multiple dishes to be ready simultaneously. They start cooking one item but forget about the others until something burns. Research published in the Journal of Neurology, Neurosurgery, and Psychiatry found that executive dysfunction appears in approximately 60 to 70% of people with vascular dementia and often manifests before obvious memory problems become apparent. The mechanism involves disrupted frontal subcortical circuits. Your frontal lobes generate plans, set goals, and monitor whether you're successfully completing tasks. Subcortical structures like the basal ganglia help execute those plans. White matter tracts carry signals between these regions. When vascular damage affects these circuits, planning ability deteriorates, even though basic intelligence and knowledge remain relatively preserved. What makes executive dysfunction particularly problematic is that it directly affects independence and safety. Managing medications requires executive function. You must remember which pills to take, at what times, and whether you've already taken today's doses. Handling finances requires planning and organization. Preparing meals safely requires sequencing steps correctly. When executive function fails, all these crucial daily activities become compromised. Additionally, people with executive dysfunction often lack insight into their deficits. They don't recognize that their planning abilities have declined. They insist they can still manage tasks that have become unsafe for them to attempt. This lack of awareness creates conflicts with family members trying to provide help. If you notice someone with vascular dementia showing increasing problems with planning, organizing, or completing multi-step tasks, this suggests progression affecting frontal subcortical circuits. Occupational therapy can help develop compensatory strategies, but progressive worsening indicates the need for increased supervision and assistance with complex tasks to maintain safety. Sign number 8. Slowed thinking and processing that gets progressively worse. Processing speed refers to how quickly your brain can take in information, understand it, and formulate a response. This cognitive function is particularly vulnerable to vascular dementia. Here's why this happens. After a diagnosis of vascular dementia, you might notice the person takes progressively longer to respond to even simple questions. You ask them what they want for lunch. They pause for 30 seconds or more before answering. Previously, this response was nearly immediate. Tasks that used to take minutes now require much longer. Paying bills that used to take 15 minutes now takes over an hour. Following a familiar recipe now requires intense concentration and significantly more time than before. Research from Stroke Journal found that slowed processing speed is one of the most sensitive early markers of vascular dementia and often worsens progressively as the disease advances. Studies using computerized cognitive testing showed that processing speed declines appear early and continue declining with each new vascular event. The mechanism involves damaged neural pathways throughout the brain. White matter consists of nerve fibers coated in myelin, a fatty substance that speeds signal transmission. These fibers connect different brain regions, allowing rapid communication. Vascular dementia frequently damages white matter through small vessel disease. As white matter damage accumulates, signals must travel through alternative, less efficient routes or through damaged pathways. Everything slows down. The brain receives information but processes it sluggishly. What makes slowed processing particularly impairing is that it affects virtually everything else. Because processing is slow, memory appears worse because the person can't encode information quickly enough. Language seems impaired because they can't retrieve words fast enough. Decision-making suffers because they can't evaluate options efficiently. Slowed processing creates a bottleneck that affects all cognitive domains. Additionally, slowed processing often goes unrecognized as a cognitive problem. Family members might think the person isn't paying attention or isn't trying hard enough to respond quickly. They become frustrated with the delays, not realizing it's a neurological impairment beyond the person's control. If you notice processing speed getting progressively slower in someone with vascular dementia, this indicates worsening white matter damage. While some slowing is expected, progressive worsening suggests continued vascular injury, requiring medical evaluation to optimize prevention strategies. Sign number 7. Increasing problems with attention and concentration. Problems maintaining attention represent another sign of vascular dementia progression that families often attribute to disinterest or stubbornness rather than disease advancement. Here's why this happens. Attention depends on networks connecting multiple brain regions, including frontal areas, parietal regions, and subcortical structures. Vascular dementia can damage any of these regions or the connections between them. The person shows increasing difficulty focusing on tasks or conversations. Their mind wanders constantly. They lose track of what they were doing mid-task. They can't filter out distractions. Background noise or visual stimuli that healthy people easily ignore completely derail their attention. Watching television becomes frustrating because they can't follow the plot. Someone asks them a question, and they respond about something completely unrelated because they lost track of the conversation. Reading becomes nearly impossible. They read a paragraph but can't remember what they just read because their attention drifted away. They have to reread the same lines repeatedly. Research from Neurology Journal found that attention problems appear early in vascular dementia and predict subsequent decline. Studies using standardized attention tests showed that people with vascular dementia and attention deficits were 3 times more likely to show significant functional decline within 2 years. The mechanism involves damage to attention networks. The thalamus acts like a relay station, filtering information and directing attention. The frontal lobes provide top-down control, deciding what to pay attention to and what to ignore. Parietal regions help orient attention in space. When vascular damage affects any of these regions or their connections, attention becomes fragmented and difficult to sustain. What makes attention problems particularly impairing is their effect on other cognitive functions. When you can't maintain attention, you can't encode memories properly. Information never gets into memory because you weren't paying attention when it was presented. You can't follow complex reasoning because your attention drifts away before you reach the conclusion. You can't solve problems effectively because you lose track of what you're trying to solve. Attention underpins almost every other cognitive ability. Additionally, attention problems affect safety. The person might leave the stove on because they start cooking, then their attention shifts to something else and they completely forget about the stove. They might walk into traffic because they're not paying attention to their surroundings. If you notice increasing difficulty with attention and concentration in someone with vascular dementia, this suggests progression affecting attention networks. Creating environments with minimal distractions can help somewhat, but progressive worsening indicates disease advancement requiring medical evaluation. Sign number 6. Subtle personality changes that family dismisses as mood swings. This is the sign most people completely miss. Subtle changes in personality and emotional regulation often appear gradually in vascular dementia progression, but families attribute them to stress, depression, or just being upset about their condition rather than recognizing them as symptoms of brain damage. Here's why this happens. The frontal lobes, particularly the prefrontal cortex, regulate emotions, control impulses, and maintain the personality traits that make you uniquely you. These regions allow you to modulate emotional responses appropriately for social contexts, control impulses to act on every feeling, and maintain your characteristic way of interacting with the world. When vascular dementia damages frontal regions or their connections through strokes or white matter disease, emotional control and personality can change in subtle but noticeable ways. The person might display emotions that seem inappropriate or excessive for the situation. They cry easily over minor things that never used to upset them. A touching commercial brings tears streaming down their face. A small frustration that they would have previously shrugged off now causes disproportionate anger or agitation. They snap at family members over trivial issues. Conversely, they might show flattened emotions, seeming indifferent to things that should matter. News of a family tragedy elicits minimal reaction. They show little enthusiasm for activities they previously enjoyed. Their emotional range seems narrow and muted. Additionally, personality changes can emerge slowly. Someone who was always considerate and polite becomes blunt and tactless, saying hurtful things without apparent awareness of how their words affect others. Someone who was cautious and thoughtful becomes impulsive, making rash decisions without considering consequences. Someone who was emotionally expressive becomes withdrawn and flat. Research from the International Journal of Geriatric Psychiatry found that emotional and personality changes appear in approximately 40% of people with vascular dementia. These changes are frequently misdiagnosed as depression, attributed to psychological adjustment to having dementia, or dismissed as the person just having bad days. The mechanism involves damage to circuits regulating emotion and social behavior. The frontal lobes normally connect to limbic structures, including the amygdala, that generate emotions. This circuit allows you to feel emotions but express them appropriately. When vascular damage disrupts this circuit, emotions become dysregulated. They're either exaggerated, with small triggers causing intense reactions, or blunted, with major events eliciting minimal response. What makes personality and emotional changes so commonly missed is that families typically interpret them psychologically rather than neurologically. They think their loved one is depressed about having dementia. They assume emotional outbursts reflect frustration with lost abilities. They don't recognize that brain damage is literally affecting the neural circuits controlling emotions and personality. This misattribution means these symptoms often go unreported to doctors. Families cope with increasing emotional volatility or personality changes without realizing these represent disease progression requiring medical attention. Changes might be managed with medications or behavioral strategies if recognized as neurological symptoms. If you notice emotional instability, inappropriate emotional reactions, or personality changes in someone with vascular dementia, particularly if these changes seem to worsen over time or appear suddenly after a plateau period, discuss them with the doctor. Don't assume they're purely psychological responses. These changes indicate progression affecting frontal limbic circuits and should be evaluated as part of the disease process. Sign number 5, progressive difficulty with language and communication. Language problems can indicate vascular dementia is affecting language networks in the brain. Here's why this happens. Many people with vascular dementia experience some language difficulties initially, depending on stroke location, but progressive worsening of language abilities or development of new language problems months after initial diagnosis suggests additional vascular events damaging language regions. The person shows increasing difficulty finding words during conversations. Pauses become longer and more frequent as they search for common words. They might use the wrong word entirely, calling a fork a spoon, or describing objects in roundabout ways because they can't retrieve the proper name. They struggle to follow complex conversations, particularly in groups. Multiple people talking overwhelms their ability to process language. They can't track who said what or follow topic changes. They frequently ask people to repeat themselves. Their own speech becomes less fluent and grammatically simpler. They use shorter sentences with simpler vocabulary than they used previously. Speech that was once articulate and complex becomes halting and basic. Research published in Stroke found that progressive language decline after initial vascular events strongly predicts additional vascular damage and overall dementia progression. Language problems worsen more in vascular dementia than would be expected from normal aging. The mechanism involves damage to language networks. Language processing requires coordination between multiple brain regions. Broca's area in the frontal lobe handles speech production. Wernicke's area in the temporal lobe manages language comprehension. Multiple connecting pathways link these regions. Vascular dementia, particularly when it causes multiple small strokes or extensive white matter disease, progressively damages these networks. What makes progressive language decline particularly significant is that it indicates ongoing brain damage beyond the original vascular events. It suggests either recurrent silent strokes, progressive small vessel disease, or enlarging areas of damaged white matter. If you notice language abilities worsening months after initial diagnosis, particularly if decline happens suddenly, suggesting another stroke, or if gradual worsening continues over time, this requires medical evaluation. Brain imaging may reveal new strokes or progressive vascular changes. Treatment adjustments may be needed to prevent further damage. Sign number 4. Worsening problems with spatial abilities and getting lost. Spatial cognitive abilities, including navigation, depth perception, and visual spatial processing, often decline progressively in vascular dementia. Here's why this happens. The right hemisphere of your brain, particularly the parietal lobe, processes spatial information and creates your internal map of environments. Vascular dementia frequently affects the right hemisphere through strokes or white matter disease. The person gets lost in increasingly familiar places. Initially, they might have difficulty navigating new environments, which seems understandable, but progression is evident when they start getting lost in places they've known for years. They can't find their way back from the bathroom in their own home. They take wrong turns in their neighborhood. They become disoriented in the grocery store where they've shopped for decades. They misjudge distances increasingly often. They reach for objects, but their hands stop short or overshoots. They have difficulty judging the height of curbs and steps, leading to trips and stumbles. They struggle parking the car, unable to judge distances from other vehicles or parking space boundaries. They have increasing difficulty with spatial tasks like setting the table with items in correct positions, fitting items into containers or drawers, or navigating crowded spaces without bumping into things. Research shows that spatial cognitive deficits appear in approximately 50% of people with vascular dementia and predict increased fall risk and reduced independence. The mechanism involves damage to right hemisphere parietal regions and their connections. These areas normally create your spatial map and process visual spatial information. When damaged by vascular events, your sense of space and direction fails. You can't maintain orientation in environments. You can't judge distances or positions accurately. What makes spatial problems particularly dangerous is that they often aren't obvious until the person attempts independent navigation and gets lost. Families may not notice problems if they're always accompanied, but when the person tries to navigate independently and becomes lost in familiar places, it indicates significant spatial dysfunction. Additionally, spatial problems dramatically increase fall risk. Misjudging curb heights, bumping into furniture, and reaching inaccurately for support all lead to falls that can cause serious injury. If you notice worsening spatial abilities or increasing episodes of getting lost in someone with vascular dementia, this indicates progression affecting right hemisphere function. Safety becomes a primary concern. The person may need supervision for any navigation outside the home. Environmental modifications, reducing clutter and creating clear pathways become essential. Sign number 3. Increasing emotional lability with rapid mood swings. Progressive emotional lability, meaning rapid, dramatic swings in mood and emotion, often indicates vascular dementia is worsening. Here's why this happens. Emotional lability involves sudden, extreme changes in emotional state that seem disproportionate to circumstances. The person might be calm and pleasant one moment, then suddenly crying or angry the next moment over minor triggers or no apparent trigger at all. They might laugh inappropriately at serious moments, then immediately become tearful. These rapid swings happen frequently throughout the day. Research shows that emotional lability appears in approximately 30 to 40% of people with vascular dementia and tends to worsen as disease progresses. It's particularly common when vascular damage affects frontal regions or the connections between frontal lobes and emotional centers deeper in the brain. The mechanism involves disrupted regulation of emotional responses. The frontal lobes normally exert control over the limbic system, the brain's emotional center. This control allows you to feel emotions but express them appropriately. When vascular damage impairs frontal limbic connections, this regulatory control fails. Emotions become unregulated, swinging wildly without the normal moderating influence. Small triggers produce exaggerated emotional responses. The person bursts into tears over minor frustrations. They become furious over trivial issues. Moments later, they're calm again, as if nothing happened. What makes emotional lability particularly challenging is its impact on caregivers and family relationships. The unpredictable mood swings create a stressful, walking on eggshells environment. Family members don't know what will trigger an emotional outburst. They become exhausted from managing the emotional volatility. Additionally, the person with dementia often has little memory of their emotional outbursts afterward. They don't understand why family members seem upset or distant. This creates additional confusion and relationship strain. If emotional lability is worsening in someone with vascular dementia, this suggests progression affecting emotional regulation circuits. Medications, including certain antidepressants, can sometimes help reduce emotional lability. Behavioral strategies and caregiver education about responding to emotional outbursts can also help manage the symptoms. Sign number 2, progressive gait changes and increasing fall risk. Walking problems appear early in vascular dementia and typically worsen progressively, indicating advancing disease. Here's why this happens. Walking requires coordination between motor control regions, balance systems, sensory processing, and cognitive functions, including attention and spatial processing. Vascular dementia often affects multiple systems involved in walking, particularly when small vessel disease damages deep brain structures and white matter. The person's gait becomes progressively slower and more shuffling. They take shorter steps and move more cautiously than before. They have increasing difficulty with turns and changes in direction, sometimes freezing when approaching doorways or narrow spaces. Balance becomes increasingly unstable. They need to hold on to furniture or walls for support. They're particularly unsteady when attempting to do two things simultaneously, like walking while talking or carrying something. Research published in the Journal of the American Geriatric Society found that gait abnormalities worsen more rapidly in vascular dementia than in Alzheimer's disease. Studies found that people with vascular dementia showed measurable gait decline approximately every 6 months following vascular events. The mechanism involves damage to multiple brain regions. The basal ganglia help initiate movements and maintain walking rhythm. Frontal regions plan and execute motor sequences. White matter tracts coordinate signals between all these areas. When vascular disease damages these structures, walking becomes progressively impaired.